Welcome to Ag in the 802. I'm Anson Tebbetts. We're in the sweetest season of the year. It's maple season. And as we kick off April, it's a bit of a roller coaster for Vermont sugar makers. Joining us to break down what's happening out there in the sugar bush is Mark Isselhardt. Mark is a maple specialist with the University of Vermont Extension. Mark, great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, let's start about the season. We're talking in early April here. What are you hearing about the season so far across Vermont?
Right. So the reports I'm getting are variable. I would say that depending on where your location is, you are upper slope, colder locations, things are chugging right along. If you're in a warmer area, maybe in the Champlain Valley or in a more southerly area, you might be wrapping up. And it's incredibly variable. You know, there's a saying, if you've seen one sugaring season, you've seen one sugaring season. And I think 2026 is turning out to be very much like that. We had periods of extended warmth, and then we had the cold come back and lock in. Generally, I think sugar makers have to be optimistic. It's so much is compressed into this really narrow window of time when you collect sap. And I'm not hearing any real desperate concern. I think people are still optimistic that they're going to have a good crop, and the ones that are wrapping up, by and large, said that they're at least reaching where they expected to be.
Yeah. From talking to sugar makers, I'm hearing when it does run, it's running really, really well, and some of the sugar makers are saying they're having record boils on those days. So it's just a fascinating season, I think.
Sap flow is a really dynamic and completely unpredictable thing, and we've had reports like you've had, the biggest runs they've ever seen, some of them overnight, which depending on how much capacity they have to store sap and when they stop boiling for any given day, it can get a little stressful for sure. But I'm hearing good things about sap sweetness. I'm hearing great things about syrup quality. So generally speaking, that's a good sign for a good productive season. But the way those sap runs come, you could have 10% of your crop in one day. You could have, in a weekend, you could have a quarter of your whole crop, and everything is so compressed. And when that sap decides to run is quite variable. Sometimes it's in the middle of the season, sometimes it's more at the beginning or end. And like we say, you just have to wait until the end and figure out where you're at.
You've been focused on education over the last few years, and you do that at UVM. And maple flavor sets us apart from other products out there. We're talking about flavor, density, color. What's your advice to producers when you're running into these challenges about those areas about quality?
Right. Well, I mean, Vermont Maple was built on a foundation of quality. We well over 100-year tradition of really focusing on making the best possible product. So I would say producers being just aware that quality matters. If you're putting it in a barrel and selling it to another business, or you're putting your name on that bottle and selling it right to the consumer, everyone has a part to play in making sure the best quality reaches the consumer. And there's a lot of knowledge. A lot of people have been doing this for a long time, but there's always more to learn. And so I guess my advice would be just be curious, be continuously trying other people's syrup, enter contests. That's a great way to get some impartial feedback. At UVM Extension, we have a new maple syrup quality lab that is there to test people's syrup and give them feedback and technical assistance on if their quality reaches grade A or if it falls short in some area. And we can work through the technical issues of maybe why it didn't. So I think just basic good business sense, taste every batch, make sure you don't assume anything about the quality, and just be curious and try to learn as much as you can.
What a wonderful service that UVM has, that testing lab now. That's pretty incredible. We've seen growth in Vermont over the last decade or 20 years in the maple industry. Where do you see it going over the next decade? Is there still going to be growth, and what are the challenges with that growth?
Right. If you take the last 25 or 30 years, Vermont has expanded their production by a factor of 5. And we produced a huge amount of syrup back then, led the nation back then, but that growth has really been dramatic. And a lot of people don't recognize how much that growth has taken place for a variety of reasons, most of which is the actual physical thing that's harvested is mostly water that gets evaporated or sent through a reverse osmosis. So you don't see it physically in quite the same way. I think the growth is going to continue, and I think the growth is driven by a few factors. One is just consumers seeking out good food and food that maybe is less processed. And I don't think that trend is really going to change. I think people are more concerned about what they consume. And maple is essentially a wild product. You have one ingredient, maple sap, that gets boiled in might be a shiny new evaporator. It might be one that's had a few miles on it. But either way, it's a relatively simple process where you're evaporating the sap. And people are hungry for that. So I think the demand is going to continue to grow. What is challenging for producers is, one, access to tappable land and labor. Labor is definitely a huge issue. It's not unique to maple, but finding people who are willing to do that work, especially so seasonal in the really tough conditions, late winter, early spring, it can be challenging to find people to do that work.
And we've got enough trees to expand. I hear some sugar makers are always looking for new trees, but we still have enough trees out there.
Yeah, so if you were to look at broadly across the whole state, we might tap 5 to 10% of the tappable trees. It's a relatively small amount, but we know that distribution is not even. So in Franklin County, the estimates are maybe 50% of the tappable trees are being tapped. So we know that some areas it'll be very competitive to find stands that aren't already being sugared. And so then you have to look further afield, and then you're talking about either hauling sap or you're setting up a whole location somewhere else. And that just gets very expensive. So there's plenty of trees, and the forests by and large are healthy. You know, we have great committed people focused on forest health, and sugar makers are great stewards of their property as well.
You introduce maple to a lot of folks on campus at UVM, and you have a Sugar on Snow party in April. And I've attended that over the last few years, and I'm always surprised of a lot of those people attending UVM. This is a new product to them. They've never tasted maple before. And that's probably a positive, because that's a new audience that we can expose them to, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's hard to argue with giving kids a chance to taste something for the very first time that has such a deep cultural connection to Vermont. And kids love it. I mean, maple syrup is tasty, and we always get questions about the pickles, but it's another opportunity to kind of explain, this great tradition we have. And the season is essentially over at that point. So the people are generally in a good mood, and it's a great chance to explain the whole process. A lot of people have no concept of how maple is made.
Yeah, the old Sugar on Snow party. It's the maple, it's the pickle, and it's the raised donut, and it's a complete meal. And you serve it up for all those students at UVM at the end of April. Well, Mark, thank you for joining with us. Mark Isselhardt with the University of Vermont Extension Service. He's all about maple, and you can reach Mark at UVM Extension. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
That'll do it for this edition of our podcast, Ag in the 802. Happy sugaring, everybody. We'll see you next time.